Sometimes one protagonist just isn't enough. Today I want to talk about the subject of dual protagonists, and I want to give you some tips on how to write a story with two main characters. What's up guys, my name is Brandon McNulty, I'm a writer and welcome to my writing channel. Today, as I mentioned in the intro, we're going to be talking about dual protagonists, and this is a subject that a lot of writers struggle with. They get confused and they think things like, well, do I think of it as writing two separate characters, or is it two halves of the same character? Let me just say up front, don't stress yourself out over this. It's a lot easier than it seems. And today I have 7 tips that'll hopefully make it even easier for you. Now, my first tip is to distinguish your two characters in a meaningful way. And you can do this in a lot of different ways. I think the most common one is what we see in buddy cop stories, where you have the straight-laced, by-the-book cop, and then you have the wild, off-the-handle cop. If you've ever seen Lethal Weapon, you know that Roger Murtaugh, Danny Glover's character, he's pretty much a normal guy. He's somebody we can relate to. And then you have Mel Gibson's character Riggs, who is just way off the handle. He's crazy, he's wild, he's jumping off buildings and putting guns to his heads and everything. These two characters, they differ in how they go about doing things, and they get into conflict because of this, and we like them because of it. It makes it interesting. We want to watch stories where you have two characters who differ from one another. We do not want to watch two of the same character together. So keep that in mind. The important thing to remember is that you need to find a meaningful way to distinguish the two characters. And once you do, you move on to my number 2 tip, which is to find their disagreement, or what I call their distancer. And this is something that puts the two characters into conflict with one another and keeps them interesting over the course of the story. If they just agree on everything, that's not a whole lot of fun. But if they disagree on their methods of doing things or their style of doing things, that can be interesting. And there are so many reasons why characters might disagree with one another. They might even just be distanced from one another because they don't want to work with a partner. How many times have we seen buddy cop stories where the main character says, I don't need a partner, I don't want to work with a partner, and then his boss comes along and says, hey, guess what, you have a partner now. And that brings me to my number 3 tip, which is that you have to find some kind of unifying goal or unifying situation that brings these two characters together. Because if you don't find a reason to bring them together, there's no logical reason for these characters to work together. I mean, if they have differences and they disagree on things, they would just go separate ways. There's no reason for them to stick around. But if they have a meaningful goal that they share, or they're in a situation where they need each other, that can create the unity. Remember, they're not going to want to work with one another, but if they need to work with one another, they'll suck it up and they'll stick together. My number 4 tip involves character arcs. And this is an area where a lot of writers get worried. They ask questions like, okay, do both of my characters have to have arcs, or can I get away with just one character having an arc? What I'm going to tell you, I think it's important that at least one character has a strong arc. And by a strong arc, I mean they should have a flaw that they work toward overcoming over the course of the story. Now, oftentimes when you have dual protagonists with character flaws and character arcs, oftentimes you will have one character who has a flaw and then the other character does not have a flaw. In fact, they represent the strength that the other character should be working toward. For instance, in the movie Titanic, you have Kate Winslet's character. She's very cowardly at the start of the movie, but in her interactions with Leo DiCaprio's character, she becomes a braver person because he is brave. He is somebody who stands up for himself, and over the course of the story, she learns to stand up for herself. And then another example is Rush Hour 1, where you have Chris Tucker's character who's very arrogant. He thinks he's the greatest cop in the world. They can do it all on his own. And yet over the course of the story, he learns through working with Jackie Chan that he does in fact need a partner in order to save the little girl who's been captured. Number 5, structure. We love structure on this channel. And I'm going to make it really easy for you as far as dual protagonist stories. When you're structuring them out, break it down into quarters. In the first quarter of your story, have two characters who want nothing to do with one another. Then in the second quarter of your story, have two characters who are willing to put up with one another. Okay, yeah, I have to work with this guy, whatever, I'll deal with it. Then in the third quarter of your story, have these two characters set aside their differences as they're working toward a goal. And then in the fourth quarter, the final act of your story, have these two characters trusting one another and being willing to make sacrifices for one another. That's a powerful way to end it. But the important thing to remember when it comes to structure, at the very beginning, they don't like each other, then they're putting up with one another, they're working together, then they're setting aside their differences, and then finally at the end they trust one another. That's the easiest way to think of it. Also, when you are coming up with your structure, keep the midpoint in mind, and by the midpoint I mean the 50% mark. This is usually the part in a dual protagonist story where, you know, they've been working together, they don't like each other, but they end up here looking at one another saying to themselves, you know what, we should probably set aside our differences, we should try working together, we should try making this work just so we can accomplish our goal. I don't like you, you don't like me, but let's make this work for the sake of the goal. And then another thing to keep in mind when you're structuring out your stories, consider including moments where your characters reveal backstory to one another. This is a great way to help them understand each other and also to help your audience understand these characters. And it's also a great way for them to grow together and trust one another. I think one of the best examples of this is in Game of Thrones, when you had that subplot with Jaime Lannister and Brienne of Tarth, and then they have that scene in the bath where Jaime explains to her how he got the name Kingslayer and why he did what he did. It helps us understand him, it helps her understand him as well, and they grow closer together over the course of the story because of it. My number 6 tip involves the ending of your story, and the important thing about the ending is that it must involve both characters. Whatever finale you come up with, both characters must be involved in solving the final problem or making the final decision or winning the final battle. For instance, at the end of Lethal Weapon 1, that's an ending where you have both characters killing the villain. If you remember, the villain pulls a gun at them at the end, and then Riggs and Murtaugh, they pull their guns out and they both shoot him at the same time. They both deliver that final blow, and it's a great ending because it shows that they are a team. Another type of ending is where you have one character saving the other from danger or destruction. This is like at the end of Rush Hour 1 when Jackie Chan is falling to his death and Chris Tucker swoops in with the tapestry just in time to save him. Or you can also have an ending where one character makes a major sacrifice or a major choice in order to benefit the other character. If you've ever played the video game The Last of Us, you know that this game ends in that particular way. And I don't want to spoil anything in case you haven't played it, but just take my word for it. It's a great example of a dual protagonist story where you have a character making a sacrifice for the benefit of the other. Now, my final tip is to remember that one of your protagonists can actually end up becoming the villain. And this is something that we saw in the movie Training Day, where you had Ethan Hawke and Denzel Washington, and it looked like it was going to be like a buddy cop drama, but in the end, Denzel Washington's character ended up becoming the antagonist. Now, if you do choose to go this route with your own story, remember that you'll have to restructure things and you'll have to set it up properly, but it is a possibility, and it's a great way to, throw a twist into a story genre that has been done 1,000 times before. So I hope this helps. Question of the day: what is your favorite dual protagonist story? Let me know in the comments section below. Thank you guys for watching. Be sure to check out my other videos. Hit the like and subscribe buttons for me. Share this video with a friend if you don't mind. And as always, remember to keep on writing.